All right, Matt, welcome to your online lesson here. We are going to get everything sorted out for you so that you can start to hit some better shots, okay? So I appreciate all the information that you left me in the voiceover about the game, where you're at currently, what you've been struggling with, a lot of pull hooks. Obviously, if there's anything we've learned, it's that as a right-handed golfer, when the ball starts going too far left, usually it's really hard to control. Oftentimes it comes with very little spin. The ball dies out of the sky and it just ends up curving too far offline, right? So we're going to work to try to neutralize that. I know you mentioned right now you're playing a draw with irons and a fade with driver. I'm not somebody who forces players to swing, a certain way or have the path be in a certain direction. I have tour players who play both fades or draws. It's really player dependent. And sometimes it's just dependent on the DNA of the pattern, meaning, right now you might be hitting a lot of big draws. Obviously, we're going to work to try to neutralize that. In the process of neutralizing it, it's possible that your pattern starts to work more towards a fade or just a little bit straighter into the ball. That's going to be totally fine as long as it's consistent, right? So to me, there are basically two things that are actually creating all of the issues that you're experiencing with currently. And I actually believe that if you're one handicap with the pattern you have now, your ceiling is going to be very high. So we can very comfortably get you into a plus handicap during this off season leading into summer, which is very good because then obviously you'll be able to compete in amateur events if you'd like, or just be able to, keep up with the big boys at your club like you mentioned. So setup position looks great here. Very little that I dislike. In fact, very balanced, very neutral position. Love the pelvic tilt that's set up. I love the arm hang. I love the amount of forward bend you have from the waist. All good things. Okay, so in the pattern itself, I notice you're somebody with a little bit of a stronger right hand grip. We're going to see that in a second when we pull up the face-on view. And so naturally, when the grip is going to be a little stronger, the club face will be a little stronger. So your shaft angle kind of matches your spine going back, which is totally fine. The thing is, you are somebody who, with that right hand being a little stronger, you get your left wrist pretty flat, pretty bowed, right? So you can kind of see that here. I can highlight it. If I were to zoom in and just drew a line as a quick reference on your lead arm plane, you can see just a little bit of some of the knuckles curling under that arm, so a little bit of a flatter wrist. Now, is the flat wrist concerning to me? Not at all. I actually quite like it for your pattern because if your wrist got any more, let's say, cupped than this, the shaft would start to get a little too far across the line for a shorter swing. That's not always ideal. But the bigger concern to me is when you have the wrist mechanics in that kind of position, which will usually want to close the club face, you want a grip type that's a little bit more neutral or weak so that the club face doesn't get too shut. Now, in your case, your club face gets very strong. So you can kind of see where the leading edge looks, right? The face angle is looking at the sky. It's a stronger club face pattern. So to me, this is the bigger concern. This is for the very simple reason that when the club face gets very closed, oftentimes you will see, especially a better player with a little bit more awareness, which I'm assuming you have that awareness because I see it in your pattern, but also just the fact that your handicap is a low single digit, so you're a good player. You'll usually see some form of a reaction to make it work with the club face being a little bit more closed. In your case, the way you made it work is you're hitting draws by just keeping the body alignments very close to the target so that the path can stay to the right. And obviously with the club face being closed, you're opening it up by keeping the body alignments out to the right so that you can just hit these big push draws. The problem is when the body stays this close, so your left shoulder exits very high, right? It's a very vertical release of the shoulder plane. You'll usually see the golfer not only tilt back with the chest, so it's a little too much like right side bend for my liking, but also when the chest is hanging back in this fashion, you'll see the hands and club exit down the target line, and you'll see a lot of releasing of the hands here through the ball. Now, can we control this? Sure, of course we can. There are some players who can control that really well, and on the range, comfortable environment, there's no real penalty involved that you're worried about. It becomes a little easier to hit like a push draw on command. You get to the course, our rhythm gets a little bit faster. That's pretty standard for most players, right? We get a little bit more nervy. We start seeing, obviously, like water right, sand left, for example. We swing a little faster. There's a little bit more timing involved. It's a little harder to control that timing. So to me, it's one of those things where you're relying on the fact that the club is obviously coming down very shallow, so you're very inside out. You can see at this point here, the club looks like it might be in an okay position, but you can see the chest very, very closed off. So your shoulder line here is pointing way out to the right. You're not quite opening up your body very well. And so naturally, if the body doesn't move well, you have to rely on the hands at impact. That's like the rule of thumb. And so we want to try to limit that as much as possible, meaning we want to rely a little bit more on the body, a little bit less on the hands in your case. So how do we do that? Well, we can start by getting the club face a little bit weaker. We're not going to do that by needing to change wrist mechanics. We can just very simply weaken the grip a little bit, and particularly your right hand, which we'll look at. A little bit more on top should help. Now, if all we do is weaken the right hand grip and think about nothing else, in theory, what you would do is you would just hit a lot of blocks way out to the right, because if your body still stays closed, well, you're still going to push the start line out to the right. And if the club face is even weaker than this, then you'll probably hit a lot of blocks and maybe even some push fades. But what that would do is, because you're not going to just keep the club face in a better position by having the face super shut, well, now we don't have to rely on the hands anymore. We can actually get the body to rotate better. And obviously in that situation, that would bring the start line back to center. But in rotating the body more, we can actually get the path a little bit more neutral as well. So you would rely not only less on the hands, but your path, instead of being so far inside out, we would clean quite a bit of that up. And obviously the grand purpose of all these changes is to get rid of the pull hook that you're hitting. And we're doing that by changing both the face and the path, and obviously within that, the relationship of how they work together. So the club movement is very good, I will say. Like, I love how the club gets to the top. I love the arm structure. I love how the club shallows in transition. You have so many good pieces to the golf swing. I just believe your club face is a little too close for your pattern, and I think your pivot needs to be a little bit better coming into the golf ball. And if we do those two things, you're going to see some huge gains in your game going forward. So just as a rule of thumb here, in terms of what I was talking about from the down the line video, when I said your right hand grip is a little bit on the stronger side, if I were to zoom in quickly, you can kind of see how much stronger your right hand is. So logo of the glove kind of facing the target. Your left hand is neutral to, if anything, maybe a touch weak, but it certainly looks more on the neutral side. Your right hand is very much underneath the handle, right on the side of the grip. The rule of thumb is, like, if you can look at where the line is pointing between the index finger and the thumb, you can see how it's pointing way out to your right shoulder. So your right hand grip is on the stronger side. To me, in this situation, because it's so much stronger than the left, it's playing a bigger influence in how much it's closing the club face. So if we got that right hand a little bit more on top of the grip, a little bit more on top of the handle, so that the line between the index finger and the thumb pointed a little bit more to like the middle of your chest, for example, instead of way out to the right like it does currently, we would get that club face in a more neutral position on its own. We wouldn't have to manipulate it through the golf swing. And then from there, you know, you get to the top. Like I said, your alignments look really good here, right? A nice big turn of the upper body off the golf ball. Love that. Love the left knee flexing down and in. Big turn of the pelvis. But then from here in transition, you can kind of see, you know, your left hip just pushes towards the target. Your left shoulder starts to rise. And you can see how your upper body is starting to already get separated from how your lower body is pushing towards the target. So as you're going to come down into this ball, you're just going to be a little too tilted back behind it with your upper body, this move right here. And that just keeps the club very shallow. It keeps the path really far to the right. It obviously makes it more difficult to rotate your body. And then from there, you have to really rely on the hands through impact. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to neutralize that effect, meaning getting this left shoulder a little bit more turning the corner, getting your chest turning over the pelvis a little bit better. You can see here when you're coming down into the ball, how your upper body is way tilted back and your pelvis is way out here. So you're not necessarily covering it, which would be the famous word that people talk about a lot, right? So that's what we're going to work to improve. We start with the grip type. It leads to a little bit of pushes and blocks temporarily, and then we match that with a better pivot. That squares it up, and then you're going to be in business.